So when we look at the unit circle, we have 6 trigonometric functions that we can use with the unit circle. If we have t as the angle measure, then we're going to let x and y be the point on the unit circle that corresponds to that angle. So if we find the sine of angle t, that's going to be equal to the y coordinate of the point on the circle. If we find the cosine of t, that's going to be equal to the x coordinate on the unit circle. And if we find tangent of t, that's going to be the y coordinate divided by the x coordinate, as long as x does not equal 0. And then cosecant, which is written out like this, cosecant, is the reciprocal of sine. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, and cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. And so you're just taking the appropriate coordinate and dividing 1 by it. Or you're taking the reciprocal for tangent, you're taking x over y instead of y over x. So let's take a look at example number 1. We're going to evaluate all 6 of the trig functions at the angle measure that's given. And so what I like to do is I like to draw my angle first. And so for part A, we have t equals 2 pi over 3. And so I know that's going to be in the second quadrant. So 2 pi over 3 is going to be this angle right here. And so I need to figure out, well, what is my ordered pair at that angle? And so if I look at my unit circle, I know that my ordered pair is -1/2 for my x value and the square root of 3 over 2 for my y value. So now I can go ahead and take those and use those in the 6 trig functions. So I'll start with sine. So the sine of 2 pi over 3 is going to equal the y value of my coordinate, so square root of 3 over 2. My cosine of 2 pi over 3 is going to equal the x value, so -1/2. And my tangent of 2 pi over 3 is going to be the sine over the cosine or the y over the x. Now, because they both have 2 as the denominator, I can just take my numerator and say, okay, well, square root of 3 over -1, which is just going to give me negative square root of 3. Okay, so those are my 3 basic trig functions. Now let's take a look at their reciprocals. And so remember that the reciprocal of sine is cosecant. So the cosecant of 2 pi over 3 is the reciprocal of whatever sine was, so it's going to be 2 over the square root of 3. Now, we can't have a square root of 3 in the denominator, so we need to rationalize our fraction. So we're going to multiply by the square root of 3 over the square root of 3, and so that will give us 2 square root of 3 all over 3. Then we can take the reciprocal of cosine, which is secant, so 2 pi over 3. And so the reciprocal of cosine is -2 over 1, which is just -2. And then finally, cotangent of 2 pi over 3 is the reciprocal of tangent, which was -1 over the square root of 3. So again, just like with cosecant, we need to rationalize this. So we're going to multiply by the square root of 3 in the denominator and the numerator. So we end up with negative square root of 3 over 3. All right, now let's take a look at part B, where our angle measure is 7 pi over 4. All right, so again, I'm going to draw my angle because I think that makes it easier to visualize. And so 7 pi over 4 isn't quite a whole circle. So if I draw my coordinate plane, then I know, okay, so this is pi over 2. Now I'm at pi. I'm at 3 pi over 2, so halfway is going to be 7 pi over 4. Okay, so this angle is 7 pi over 4, which means that this ordered pair right here is going to be the square root of 2 over 2, and negative square root of 2 over 2. All right, so now I can go ahead and look at each of my 6 trig values. And so again, I'm going to start with sine. So sine of 7 pi over 4 is just my y value, so negative square root of 2 over 2. My cosine of 7 pi over 4 is my x value, so it's positive square root of 2 over 2. And my tangent of 7 pi over 4 is my y value over my x value. And again, they have the same denominator, so I can just take the numerators. So negative square root of 2 over the square root of 2 is going to give me negative 1. Now we'll go ahead and do our reciprocal functions. The reciprocal of sine is cosecant. So cosecant of 7 pi over 4 is going to be negative 2 over the square root of 2. But again, we have to rationalize that because we can't have a square root in the denominator. So whatever that denominator is, we're going to multiply by it in the numerator and the denominator. So we end up with negative 2 square root of 2 all over 2, which is really just negative square root of 2. All right, now we can go ahead and do the reciprocal of cosine, which is secant. So the secant of 7 pi over 4 is going to be the reciprocal of cosine. And so that's 2 over the square root of 2. And this is just like the cosecant, where we need to rationalize. And so we're going to multiply by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. And again, we're going to get 2 square root of 2. The only difference, and this is all over 2, the only difference between this and the cosecant is that we have a positive now instead of a negative. So our answer is positive square root of 2. And then our reciprocal of tangent is cotangent. And the reciprocal of negative 1 is just negative 1. So in this case, your tangent and your cotangent are the same value. All right, let's take a look at part C, where our angle measure is negative 2 pi. So if we draw that angle, we're going counterclockwise. I'm sorry, we're going clockwise because it's a negative angle, and we're landing right back on that x-axis. And so that point there is going to be the point 1, 0. Okay, and so we can find the sine of negative 2 pi is the y value, so it's 0. The cosine is going to be 1 because it's the x value. And the tangent is going to be y over x, so 0 over 1, which is just 0. So in this case, your sine and your tangent are the same. Now let's take a look at our reciprocal function. So we've got cosecant of negative 2 pi, and that's going to be 1 over 0. And you can't divide anything by 0, so that one is actually undefined. And when we take a look at graphing, we're going to see that there's an asymptote there. So now let's take a look at the reciprocal of cosine, which is secant. So we have secant of negative 2 pi, and the reciprocal of 1 is 1 over 1, which is just 1. So in this case, your secant and your cosine are the same. And now let's take a look at cotangent. And so cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, and so it's going to be 1 over 0. Again, just like cosecant, we can't do that, so it is undefined. All right, now let's take a look at the last part where we have our angle measure is negative 2 pi over 3. And I'm going to draw this angle. And we need to go clockwise because it's a negative angle. And so if we were going, we're going to go through the first quadrant, well, through one quadrant and to the next quadrant. And so there is your negative 2 pi over 3. It has a coterminal angle of 5 pi over 3. And so that ordered pair is going to be negative 1/2 negative square root of 3 over 2. All right, so let's take a look at our sine value. Our sine value is our y, so we have negative square root of 3 over 2. Our cosine value is going to be negative 1/2, and our tangent value is going to be, remember it's sine over cosine or y over x, so negative square root of 3 over negative 1, which is the square root of 3. So now we can do our reciprocal functions. Cosecant of negative 2 pi over 3 is going to be negative 2 over the square root of 3, which we need to rationalize. So we multiply by the square root of 3 in the numerator and the denominator. And so we end up with negative 2 square root of 3 all over 3. Our secant is the reciprocal of cosine, and so it's going to be negative 2 over 1, which is just negative 2. And then our cotangent is going to be the reciprocal of tangent, so it's going to be 1 over the square root of 3. And again, we need to rationalize that, so we end up with the square root of 3 over 3. Now let's take a look at our even and odd trig functions. So basically, when you try to determine if a function is even or odd, you plug in the negative value, and if you get the same value as the original, positive, then you have an even function. And really, if you're looking at the graph, even means it's reflexive over the y-axis. So if you plug in the negative value and you get the same answer, your function is even. So in terms of trig functions, cosine and secant are both even functions. Now our odd functions are all the rest, sine, tangent, cosecant, cotangent, because when we plug in the negative t value, we get negative sine of t or negative tangent of t. And so these functions are odd, which if you look at the graph means that they're going to be reflexive over the y and then the x, or the x and then the y axes, or you could rotate 180 degrees. That is the kind of symmetry that an odd function will have. All right, so let's take a look at example 2. Evaluate the cosine of 10 pi over 4. So for cosine of 10 pi over 4, we need to use our coterminal angles. So if we want to convert 10 pi over 4 to a coterminal angle, we can take away one full circle, which is 8 pi over 4. Remember that that's the same thing as 2 pi. And so we end up with 2 pi over 4, which is really pi over 2. So that means that the cosine of 10 pi over 4 is the same thing as the cosine of pi over 2. And if we look at our unit circle, we can see that if we draw that angle, that's just the 90-degree angle, pi over 2. And so that point on the unit circle is going to be the point 0,1. And since it's cosine, we want the x value. And so that is the cosine of 10 pi over 4. So now let's take a look at sine of negative 11 pi over 2. So again, we need to find the coterminal angle. In this case, since it's negative, we're going to add. And so the first one we're going to add is 4 pi over 2. That's one full circle, but that's not enough to make it positive. So we'll add another one, 4 pi over 2. And so we have negative 11 plus 8. That's still not going to give us a positive. So we'll add one more full circle. And now we have negative 11 pi plus 4 pi plus 4 pi plus 4 pi. And that will give us a positive 1 pi over 2. And so the sine of negative 11 pi over 2 is equal to the sine of pi over 2, which is 1, because we already drew that figure in part A. Let's take a look at even and odd functions. So in example number 3, if tangent of t equals 2/3, then we need to find the tangent of negative t. Well, going back to our even and odd functions, the tangent of negative t is going to be equal to negative tangent of t, because tangent is an odd function. And so if the tangent of t is equal to 2/3, then our tangent of negative t is going to be equal to negative 2/3. And finally, let's take a look at example number 4. Number 4, we're just using a calculator to evaluate the trig function. And so the first thing we need to do is make sure our calculator is in radians mode. So the default should be radians, but you may have changed it to degrees at some point. So go ahead and make sure that your calculator is in radians mode. And then you can just hit the sine button and type in 3 pi divided by 8. So when you put it in a calculator, it should look something like this. And if you type in 3 pi divided by 8, your calculator is going to use the order of operations. So it will multiply the 3 and the pi before dividing by the 8. And so you don't need to worry about adding any extra parentheses or anything like that. And then when you go ahead and hit enter, you get 0.9239 approximately. We've rounded to the nearest 4 decimal places. Okay, and so let's take a look at part B. This one is a little bit more complicated because we don't have a cosecant button on the calculator. Keep in mind that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So remember that if we look at the front of our notes, cosecant of t was equal to 1 over y, and sine of t is equal to y. So cosecant, So cosecant of t is equal to 1 over the sine of t. That does not mean it's this. That is not what you want to use on your calculator because that's actually the inverse, okay? Because sine is a function, not a variable. So what this is saying is the inverse function of sine. The inverse function of sine. You're not raising sine to the power of -1 because you can't raise a function to the power. You would be raising the the variable to the power. So that is not what you want to use. Okay, but we can type this into the calculator. So you're going to type in 1 divided by the sine of 3. And so your calculator will take the sine of 3 before dividing the 1 by that answer. And when you do that, you get approximately 7.0862.